I still remember the first time I stepped inside the abandoned war bunker. The air was thick, cold, and almost metallic, pressing against my lungs with every slow breath. Dust danced in the pale shafts of light that managed to pierce through the cracks in the concrete walls, catching on rusted beams and broken machinery. My flashlight trembled slightly in my hand, casting long shadows that flickered across the damp corridors. Somewhere deep within, a low hum began, not mechanical, not electrical, but something that seemed to pulse in time with my own heartbeat. The silence around me was immense, broken only by the faint echo of distant footsteps, and yet I was alone. Or at least, I thought I was. That's when I saw it. A faint figure, half glimpsed in the corner of my vision, vanishing the instant I focused on it. I never should have opened that door. The woods were quiet. A pale fog hung low, clinging to the damp earth. I had wandered farther than usual, past the trees I knew, past the stones I remembered. Something in the underbrush caught my eye, a subtle indentation, almost swallowed by ivy and moss. I knelt. The soil was soft, fragrant with decay, and beneath it, a cold metal edge gleamed faintly. A hatch, almost invisible, like it had been waiting for me to notice. I pressed my fingers against it. It shivered, the metal humming faintly under my touch. A smell rose from below, stale, heavy, like old rainwater and something older, almost forgotten. The wind shifted, leaves whispered against one another, and for a moment, the world felt suspended. The air smelled of damp earth and rust, and my heartbeat felt loud in the silence. I found the handle, cold, rough. It resisted my pull, then gave way with a reluctant creak. Below, darkness swallowed everything. The air was thick, still, as though the bunker had been breathing quietly for decades. I leaned closer. A faint scratching echoed from below, soft at first, like claws brushing against stone. I froze. The sound grew, hesitant, almost questioning, then vanished. Only the quiet remained, pressed close, intimate. I lowered myself. Each step on the ladder sent a shiver up my spine. Metal groaned beneath me, rust clinging to my palms. The air grew colder, heavier, tasting faintly of iron. I reached the bottom. The darkness was absolute. Even with my flashlight, shadows clung to corners, stretching and shrinking with each tremble of light. The walls were bare, concrete etched with faint scratches, like memory scraping itself against time. A hush seemed to live here. Every breath I took echoed softly, returning to me warped and distant. A faint rustling came from a far corner. I froze again. My fingers brushed against the wall, feeling its damp chill. The noise stopped, and then soft footsteps. Not mine. Slow, deliberate. Something moved just beyond where my light reached. I want to call out. My voice stuck. Only a shallow breath escaped. Trembling in the silence, I walked forward, careful, each step measured. The metal ladder above hummed faintly, almost in rhythm with my heartbeat. The smell of cold stone, mildew, and something faintly metallic lingered in my nose. Another scratch. Closer this time. I saw a shadow shift, thin and pale against the far wall, retreating just as I tried to focus. I leaned against the concrete, feeling its roughness against my cheek. The shadow lingered, teasing the edge of my vision. Then it vanished entirely. The only thing left was a quiet, settling like dust. I stepped back toward the ladder. Something in the air felt reverent, like the bunker remembered. Every breath seemed heavy with the past, and every sound was borrowed, softened, unreal. I lingered at the entrance, my hand resting on the cold metal hatch. The fog outside pressed against me through the thin opening, faint and familiar. The scratching never returned, but I could still feel it, soft, patient, waiting below. I climbed out slowly, letting the damp foliage brush my arms. The fog swallowed the bunker's mouth behind me. I didn't look back. Not yet. The forest seemed the same. But beneath the leaves, under the soil, something kept its watch, and I could still feel its presence. The air was thick, almost oily as I stepped inside. The hallway stretched ahead, dim and narrow. A faint hum of stillness pressed against my ears. Rusted metal doors leaned against their frames, hinges stiff with neglect. Paint peeled from the walls and thin, curling strips, flaking under my fingertips. The smell of damp iron and dust rose in slow waves. My flashlight cut a pale line across the corridor. Shadows twisted along the walls, stretching longer than they should. I caught a glimpse of movement, just at the edge, and it vanished before I could focus. Each step echoed, hollow and tentative. The floor was uneven, cracked concrete giving way to patches of rust and grime. Soft scuffs brushed against my shoes, or maybe the walls themselves were sighing. I paused. The silence pressed close, yet something lingered in it, watching. The smell of cold metal mixed with something faintly sweet, old perfume or rot. A door shivered as I passed, hinges groaning like a tired breath. I leaned closer, brushing my fingers along the rusted handle. It vibrated faintly under my touch, almost alive. The flashlight flickered. A shadow recoiled, then slithered along the peeling paint, settling into a corner just out of reach. My skin prickled. The air was heavy, humming faintly, like a memory trapped in walls. I moved forward, careful, listening. A soft scrape echoed from somewhere deeper, slow, deliberate. I couldn't tell if it was metal or fingernails tracing the surface. The corridor twisted, narrowing and widening in uneven rhythm. Doors leaned at strange angles. Their numbers faded, unrecognizable. The shadows seemed to lean toward me, folding into shapes that vanished if I stared too long. I brushed against the wall. The paint flaked into my palms, gritty and cold. A sharp tang of iron rose in my nose, like blood long forgotten. Something moved just beyond the light, a whisper of motion, soft footsteps or nothing at all. I slowed. The hum of stillness grew denser, more intimate, like it was breathing alongside me. I could feel it at the nape of my neck, cold and patient. A door had creaked open on its own, swinging slowly. Darkness pulled inside, deeper than the hallway, swallowing my flashlight's beam. I leaned closer. The smell shifted, earthy, wet, and faintly chemical, like decay pressed against concrete. I stepped inside. The floor was slick underfoot, cool and uneven. Shadows flickered across the walls, thinner than smoke, heavier than air. Something brushed against my arm. I tensed, but nothing remained. I could hear my own breath, sharp and shallow. The hallway behind me seemed longer now, bending unnaturally. Every door I passed whispered something, metal moaning, paint shifting, time folding in small increments. I lingered in the silence. The shadows folded inward, curious, patient. The rusted metal seemed to pulse faintly, echoing my heartbeat. I didn't move for a long moment. The air tasted of dust and cold iron. The hallway waited quietly, as if inviting me to stay. Finally, I turned. Each step back was slow, careful, the rusted doors groaning with complaint. Shadows followed me, stretching, folding, settling. The hallway faded behind me as I reached the exit. The fog outside pressed against the walls, faint and familiar. I didn't look back, but the memory of it stayed. The smell of iron, the scrape of metal, the patient hum in the walls. Even now, I can feel it, watching from just beyond the light. The air was cold, heavy, and unmoving. Concrete walls stretched on either side, pale under my flashlight, damp with the weight of years. The smell of mildew and iron rose in slow, lingering waves. I stepped forward. Soft whispers brushed against the edges of my hearing. Not words I knew, names I could not place. Each breath I took felt borrowed, swallowed by the bunker's stillness. The walls seemed to lean inward, closer with every step. A faint rustling echoed, like fabric sliding across stone. I pressed my hand against the cold concrete. It shivered faintly under my palm, as though acknowledging me. The whispers grew, layered and indistinct, rising and falling like waves beneath the surface. I tried to focus. Each voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, curling around the corners of the hall. I caught the hint of a syllable, soft, deliberate, almost pleading. The floor was rough beneath my shoes. Cracks in the concrete held damp earth, giving off a faint, sweet decay. The flashlight trembled slightly in my grip, flickering along the walls. A shadow shifted. Not mine. Long, thin, stretching along the peeling paint, folding into the corners. I froze. The whispers paused, then returned, softer now, like breasts pressed against the walls themselves. I could almost feel fingers tracing the concrete. Slow, patient, unseen. I leaned closer to a corner. The air smelled faintly metallic, like old blood mixed with rust. The whispers seemed to pulse with it, rising and fading, as if carrying memories I was never meant to know. A door at the end of the corridor groaned, swinging slightly. The movement stirred the shadows, making them coil like smoke. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the handle. Something brushed the side of my face. Not air, not wind. The sensation lingered, cold, deliberate, almost aware of me. I stepped past it slowly. The whispers followed, curling around my ankles, trailing along the walls. Names whispered again, fleeting, impossible to catch, yet heavy in the silence. I paused mid-hallway. The shadows folded into one another, stretching across the floor. The walls seemed to hum faintly, vibrating under my fingertips, carrying the echoes of lives long gone. A faint smell of smoke lingered. Not fire, something older, something burned and preserved. It mixed with the dampness, pressing against me. The whispers grew fainter. The shadows pulled back into corners. I could feel the bunker holding its breath, waiting. I touched the wall again. Cold, rough, unyielding but alive. The echoes of voices lingered there, quiet now, patient. I walked toward the exit. Every step sounded far too loud. The whispers followed a few moments longer, then retreated, leaving only the hum of stillness. Outside, the fog pressed against the bunker's mouth. The air was warmer, softer. But even in the daylight, I could feel the memory of those voices clinging to me, faint and persistent. The bunker waited behind me, and somewhere inside, the walls remembered. The hallway was quiet. Cold air pressed against my skin, lingering in small, sharp gusts. The concrete walls were damp, smelling faintly of soil and rust, heavy with stillness. I moved slowly, each step measured, the floor cold beneath my shoes. The flashlight trembled in my hand, casting pale light that shivered along the walls. Shadows pooled and twisted in the corners, moving just beyond focus. A sudden chill brushed past me, not from the air above, but from somewhere behind, slipping along my spine. It carried the faint scent of smoke and wet earth, strange and intimate. I paused, holding my breath. The bunker seemed to inhale with me, waiting. A shadow flickered, just beyond the beam, thin and fleeting, retreating the instant I tried to look. The metal walls hummed softly, a rhythm too slow to be mine, too deliberate to be nothing. Each step I took echoed, hollow and patient, carried by the damp air. I reached for a door handle. Cold, rough, uneven. It vibrated faintly beneath my fingers, almost breathing beneath the metal. The shadow shifted again. Long, thin, curling along the peeling paint like smoke, though no smoke rose. I stepped back instinctively, the chill wrapping tighter around my chest. The whispers were faint now. Carried on the air, I could feel brushing past my ears. Not words, not sentences. Names, perhaps, fleeting, teasing, impossible to remember. I shivered. The air tasted metallic, sharp, mingling with the dampness pressing against my nostrils. Every surface seemed to hum lightly, vibrating beneath my touch, carrying an almost living weight. A soft draft brushed my cheek. Not wind, not air, a presence, patient, deliberate, just beyond sight. I moved forward. Each step brought another flicker of shadow, another ghost of movement, always out of reach. The chill followed, curling around my ankles, creeping higher, intimate and insistent. The walls leaned closer. The whispers folded into the hum of stillness. I could feel them brushing my skin, brushing my thoughts, teasing at the edge of my mind. The flashlight caught a door swinging slightly. Hinges groaned like a tired breath. I leaned closer. The smell of smoke stronger here, layered with wet stone and decay. I could feel the shadow again, pressing just beyond the pale light. A soft, deliberate brush along my arm, fleeting but undeniable. My heart thumped, slow and heavy, echoing in the cold air. I stepped back. The chill lingered, brushing against my neck, moving with the quiet patience of something unseen. The whispering walls receded slightly, patient, watching. I lingered for a moment, fingers grazing the damp concrete. The cold was absolute, sharp yet alive, carrying the scent of fire long extinguished and earth long buried. The shadows settled, folding into corners, thin and patient. I climbed back toward the ladder. Every step echoed, hollow, bouncing along the walls. The chill followed to the top, brushing one last time, before fading into the stagnant air outside. The fog pressed against the bunker's mouth. The night smelled of wet earth, distant smoke, and a faint echo of what I had left behind. I didn't look back, but the memory of cold breath lingered. The shadow, the whispering walls, and I could still feel them, patient, waiting just beyond the edge of light. The corridor narrowed, the walls pressing closer with each step. The air was still, heavy with dust and damp stone. A faint hum vibrated under my feet, subtle, patient, like the bunker itself was breathing. Ahead, a door loomed. Heavy, rusted, locked. The metal handle was scratched, gouges deep and uneven, like something fought to hold its secrets inside. I knelt, brushing my fingers along the scratches. Cold, rough, the groove smelled faintly of iron, and beneath it, a hint of smoke lingered, soft, almost imperceptible. A thump came from behind the door, soft, hesitant. I froze, heart pressing against my ribs, listening. The air shifted, cooler now, carrying the faint scent of wet stone and something older, something sharp and waiting. I leaned closer. The thump came again, slower this time, deliberate. I pressed my ear to the metal. Nothing human. The sound pulsed beneath the surface, low, echoing like a heartbeat out of sync with mine. The corridor seemed to stretch. Shadows pulled around the edges of the flashlight, curling into corners, folding into themselves. I felt them leaning toward me, patient, curious, unseen. I traced the scratches again, fingertips cold and trembling. They felt almost alive, pulsing faintly, carrying the weight of something trapped behind. A soft draft brushed my cheek, brushing away the stale dust, carrying whispers I couldn't understand. Another thump, closer now. Something shifted just beyond the door. A shadow flickered through the keyhole, gone the instant I blinked. I stepped back. The concrete was rough beneath my palm as I pressed against the wall. The air tasted faintly metallic, mixed with dampness and smoke, curling in slow, patient waves around my senses. The thumps continued, irregular now, teasing, testing. I could feel vibration under my shoes, traveling up through my legs, threading through the silence. The corridor seemed to hum with it, carrying every heartbeat, every breath, every tremble. I hesitated. The flashlight caught a thin scratch running along the top of the doorframe. Another shadow shifted along the peeling paint above. Cold pressed against the back of my neck. Insistent, intimate. I pressed my hand again to the door. The metal vibrated faintly, responsive, alive. The thump followed my touch, almost in rhythm with my heartbeat. The whispers returned, soft, layered, curling around the edges of my hearing. No words, just voices folded into the hum of the walls. They seemed to echo from behind the door, brushing my ears, brushing my thoughts. I stepped back slowly. The corridor stretched behind me, shadows curling, folding, patient. The door waited heavy, silent now, except for the faint pulse beneath the metal. The chill lingered, brushing along my arms, rising to my shoulders. I could feel the thumps fading, settling deeper inside the lock frame. And even as I moved away, the memory of the sound pressed against my chest, quiet but insistent. Outside, the fog pressed against the bunker's mouth. The night smelled of wet earth, faint smoke, and distant decay. I didn't look back, but I could still feel it. The locked door, the scratches, the soft, patient thump, waiting for me to return. The corridor was swallowed in darkness. Concrete walls pressed close, damp and cold beneath my fingertips. The air smelled of earth and rust, heavy, patient, waiting. I moved forward slowly. Every step echoed hollowly, bouncing off walls that seemed farther apart than they should be. A soft hum lingered in the air, low and steady, like the bunker breathing beneath me. Then I heard it. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, echoing in the distance. Not mine. The rhythm was careful, measured, almost testing. I froze. The air shifted. A faint chill brushed my arms, carrying the scent of wet stone and something faintly metallic. I strained, trying to place the source, but the shadows stayed still. I moved closer, heart pressing against my ribs. The footsteps continued, echoing through the corridor. I turned corners slowly, careful not to startle what wasn't there. The light from my flashlight quivered across the walls. Shadows stretched unnaturally, folding into themselves, retreating as I stepped toward them. Each step I took seemed to draw the sound nearer, yet it never came into view. A door groaned somewhere behind me, hinges moving faintly with the building sigh. The footsteps paused for a moment, patient, deliberate, then resumed, softer, teasing, curling around the walls like smoke. I pressed my hand against the cool concrete, grounding myself. The floor beneath my shoes was rough, uneven, coated with dust and flaking paint. Every vibration traveled up through my legs, threading into my chest. The footsteps echoed again, closer now, but still unseen. I followed them down a narrower corridor. The air tasted faintly metallic, mixed with dampness and the smell of old decay. A shadow flickered at the edge of the light, long, thin, retreating when I blinked. I held my breath. The footsteps stopped. The corridor settled into a hush, so thick it pressed against my ears. I could feel the silence moving, waiting, heavy and patient. I stepped forward cautiously. Cold brushed along my neck, creeping across my shoulders. The walls seemed to lean inward, carrying whispers I could not understand, brushing my thoughts. Another step echoed, slow, careful, not mine. I turned, sweeping the light across the hallway. Nothing, only the concrete, the peeling paint. The shadows curled into corners. The footsteps moved again, fading, stretching down the corridor behind me. I could feel them lingering, patient, deliberate, a presence just beyond sight. Every breath I drew tasted of dust, metal, damp stone. I moved back slowly, hand on the wall, grounding myself against the unseen. The hum of stillness returned, subtle, intimate, vibrating beneath my fingertips. The footsteps did not follow further, but I could still feel them in the memory of the air. I reached the ladder, climbing toward the exit. The fog outside pressed against the bunker's mouth, cold and familiar. The night smelled of wet earth, distant smoke, and the quiet pulse of the place behind me. I didn't look back, but I could still feel it. Slow, careful footsteps, patient, echoing in the dark. The room was small, dim, and cold. Pale light from my flashlight cut through the dust of the air, revealing walls lined with bunk beds. The smell of damp fabric and old wood pressed against my nose, thick and lingering. The blankets were tattered, stiff with age, frozen in shapes as though the beds had not been touched in decades. I reached out, brushing a fingertip over rough fabric. It shivered faintly under my touch, carrying the weight of long-forgotten nights. Shadows pooled along the corners of the room, curling around the beds. I thought I saw something, a figure sitting on the edge of a lower bunk, thin, pale, still. I blinked. It vanished. Only the blanket sagged slightly, as if it had held weight moments ago. The air was still but alive. Soft rustling brushed against the walls, like fabric shifting. The faint scent of mildew mixed with the sweetness of decayed wood, almost imperceptible, almost comforting. I moved closer to the first bunk. Every step echoed, small and hollow, against the concrete floor. The blankets seemed to fold into themselves, forming shapes just beyond focus. A figure appeared again, just for a heartbeat, sitting upright, watching, then gone. No movement, no sound, but the weight of presence remained. I ran my fingers along the rough wood, feeling grooves, splinters, the slow pulse of the room beneath my touch. The shadows shifted as I passed, a whisper of motion, soft and deliberate, curling into corners I couldn't reach. The hum of stillness pressed against my chest. Every breath I drew was heavy, tasting of dust, mildew, and something faintly metallic. I could feel the figures lingering, patient, unseen, folding into the folds of blankets and shadows. I leaned closer to a top bunk. The fabric was brittle, whispering faintly against my fingertips. For a moment, I thought I saw eyes, dark hollows and pale shapes, looking back at me. A soft, deliberate rustle came from below. The figure on the lower bunk shifted again, or maybe the blanket did. The air seemed to pulse with presence, carrying warmth that wasn't mine. I stepped back slowly. The room seemed smaller now, walls bending subtly, folding shadows closer. Figures appeared briefly at the edges of the light, then vanished before I could focus. The smell of dampness and old cloth clung to my skin. I could feel the air press closer to me, holding its breath, waiting. The blanket sagged as though heavy with memory. Each crease a story I would never hear. I lingered in the center of the room. The shadows gathered slightly, quiet, patient. The figures never fully formed, never fully gone. I turned toward the doorway. The flashlight caught the edge of a bunk, and for a moment I felt eyes watching from above. Then nothing. The corridor beyond waited, pale and quiet. I stepped toward it slowly, leaving the bunk bed behind. The rustling and shifting faded, but the memory of their presence pressed against me. Outside, the fog pressed softly against the bunker walls. The night smelled of wet earth, faint smoke and silence. I didn't look back, but the figures remained, patient and quiet, folded into the shadows of the old bunk beds. And I could still feel them, lingering, watching, waiting for the next curious soul to enter. The room was small, dust-heavy, and quiet. A solitary lamp sat on an old desk, its pale light trembling like a pulse. The air smelled faintly of smoke and old paper, lingering in slow, deliberate waves. I stepped closer. The lamp flickered again, shadows quivering across the walls. The floor beneath my shoes was cold and uneven, concrete rough and damp. Papers lay scattered on the desk. Some shifted slightly, though the air was still. I bent closer, fingertips brushing brittle edges. They shivered under my touch, as though stirred by unseen hands. The shadows danced and stretched, long lines, twisting against the walls, folding into corners. I thought I saw shapes in the dark, thin and pale, retreating the moment I blinked. The lamp flickered again, plunging the room into near darkness. A soft hum vibrated through the air, low, patient. Every breath I drew tasted of dust, faint iron, and the warmth of something long decayed. I reached toward the papers, cold and rough beneath my fingers, edges sharp with age. One fluttered, then settled, carrying a faint scent of mildew and smoke. The lamp's light caught the movement, shadows folding and stretching with it. I stepped back. The hum grew quieter, blending with my heartbeat. I could feel the darkness pressing closer, patient, watching, almost aware of me. The shadows shifted again, curling across the floor and up the walls. A faint draft brushed my cheek, carrying the smell of damp stone and something faintly metallic. The papers rustled once more, subtle, deliberate, though nothing moved. I leaned closer to the lamp. The light trembled, long shadows quivering across the cracked floor. I could feel the presence of the room folding into itself, patient, watching every movement. The hum pulsed softly through the floor. Every step I took echoed, hollow and slow. The papers whispered faintly under my fingertips, as if carrying memory of someone or something that had been here before. I stepped back again. The lamp flickered, briefly brighter, then dimmed. The shadows seemed to fold into themselves, curling around the edges of the room, patient, silent. I lingered for a moment. The air tasted of dust and faint smoke, pressing against my nose and tongue. The desk, the papers, the trembling lamp, all held a weight, quiet and deliberate, that seemed older than the walls themselves. Finally, I turned toward the doorway. The corridor beyond was dark and still. The lamp flickered one last time, casting long, quivering shadows that seemed to reach after me. Outside, the fog pressed softly against the bunker walls. The night smelled of wet earth, faint smoke, and quiet, patient silence. I didn't look back, but the lamp remained, flickering, waiting, and I could still feel its presence, watching, patient, just beyond the edge of light. The bunker was silent. Cold air pressed against my skin, heavy with dust and the smell of damp concrete. The walls closed in subtly, shadows pooling at the corners, patient and still. I moved forward slowly. Each step echoed hollowly, bouncing down the corridor, swallowed by the dark. The flashlight trembled in my hand, pale light flickering against peeling paint and rusted metal. Then I heard it, a cry, distant, faint, yet impossibly near. human or something pretending. It reverberated through the walls, curling around corners, folding into the cracks of concrete, every fiber of my being pressed against it, heart thudding, ears straining. The smell of damp stone grew sharper. A faint tang of iron lingered in the air, sharp and immediate. I stepped carefully, fingertips brushing the walls, tracing rough grooves and flaking paint. The cry echoed again, longer this time. Hollow, desperate, almost pleading. It carried weight, like memory pressed into the walls, trapped and patient. Shadows shifted along the hallway, long, thin, folding into themselves and stretching toward me. I blinked, and the space seemed to stretch unnaturally, bending around the sound. I stopped. The air vibrated faintly with the resonance of the cry. The concrete beneath my shoes felt colder, heavier, as though the sound pressed down into the floor. Another cry, impossibly far, impossibly close. I leaned forward instinctively, straining to locate it. Shadows recoiled slightly, then spread again, patient, curling like smoke. The hum of stillness returned, soft and intimate. Every breath I drew tasted of dust, iron, and damp stone. The cry lingered in the walls, echoing faintly in my skull. I followed the sound down a narrowing corridor. Rust flakes crunched beneath my shoes, brushing against concrete, sending faint vibrations up my legs. The air smelled faintly sweet, like decay pressed against earth. The cry pulsed again, hollow, resonating through the walls and floors. I could feel it brushing my skin, threading into my thoughts. Each step I took seemed to carry me both closer and farther at once. Shadows stretched across the walls, long, thin, folding into corners I couldn't reach. The cry twisted through them, bending the air, pressing against my chest. I could feel a presence, patient, deliberate, waiting just beyond the flashlight's beam. I paused mid-hallway. The floor was rough beneath my palms as I pressed against the wall. The cry faded slightly, leaving only the hum of silence and the memory of its hollow weight. I stepped back slowly, careful, the echo lingering in the damp air. Every surface seemed to tremble with memory. Walls, floor, ceiling. The shadows retreated just enough to feel empty, yet heavy. I climbed the ladder toward the exit. The fog outside pressed gently against the bunker's mouth, soft and familiar. The night smelled of wet earth, faint smoke, and the weight of something unseen. I didn't look back, but the echo remained. The hollow cry, impossibly near and impossibly far, pressed into my memory. Even now I can feel it. Patient, waiting. The corner was dark, pressed against the wall, shadows curling around it like smoke. An old metal trunk sat there, heavy and silent, rust eating at its edges. The air smelled faintly of iron and damp earth, cold and thick. I stepped closer. The floor beneath my shoes was rough and uneven, dust coating every crack. The trunk seemed impossibly still, yet I could feel something watching. The lid shifted, slowly, deliberately. A faint groan echoed through the air, metal against metal, soft but certain. I pressed my hand to the cool surface, rough and pitted, cold beneath my fingertips. A faint vibration ran through it, pulsing as though something inside breathed. The air smelled sharper now, iron heavy, mixed with the must of long-forgotten things. I leaned closer, the flashlight's beam trembling across peeling paint and rusted hinges. Shadows stretched unnaturally, folding into corners, waiting. The lid shifted again. A tiny, deliberate movement. I could feel it through the metal, the weight of presence, patient and aware. I knelt slightly, fingertips tracing the edges of the trunk, cold and rough, carrying memory in every groove. A faint hum seemed to rise from beneath, subtle, almost inaudible, vibrating through my chest. The room felt smaller. Shadows pressed inward, folding along walls, pooling beneath the trunk. The air tasted metallic, faintly sweet, and pressed against my tongue like damp stone. I stepped back, careful not to startle it. The lid shifted one last time, a slow, deliberate tilt, almost teasing. Rust flakes whispered under my fingertips, carried by a subtle draft I could barely feel. The hum faded slightly, replaced by silence, patient, waiting. I could sense something breathing beneath the metal, alive in its own quiet way. The trunk seemed older than the room itself, holding weight, memory, and perhaps intention. I lingered a moment, watching shadows fold along the edges. The metal pulsed faintly beneath my hand, and I could feel presence threading into the silence. A faint smell of smoke lingered, mingling with rust and damp, pressing against my senses. I stepped back fully. The trunk remained still, lid slightly shifted, as though teasing the very air around it. Shadows pooled in the corner, patient, quiet, curling against the walls. The corridor beyond waited, pale and silent. I moved toward it slowly, leaving the trunk behind. The cold air brushed my skin, carrying the memory of something inside, patient and aware. Outside, fog pressed softly against the bunker walls. The night smelled of wet earth, iron, and quiet anticipation. I didn't look back, but I could still feel it. The rusted trunk, the shifting lid, and whatever waited inside, patient, still alive and quiet. The room was still, heavy with dust and cold stone. Pale light from my flashlight trembled across the walls, stretching long fingers of illumination into the corners. The air smelled faintly of mildew, damp concrete, and something older, something patient. Shadows pooled in the corners. They shifted subtly, folding into themselves. Shapes that weren't quite human, thin and angular, lingering just beyond the edge of light. I stepped closer. The floor was rough beneath my shoes, dust crunching faintly with each movement. The shadows darted, retreating silently, almost teasing, almost aware of me. A cold draft brushed my cheek. It carried the faint scent of decay and iron, pressing against my senses. I could feel the shapes watching, patient, folding into corners, moving when I wasn't looking. The flashlight trembled in my hand. Every shadow stretched and twisted, curling like smoke along the walls and floor. I blinked, and one seemed to vanish, only to reappear a step further down the hallway. The hum of silence pressed against my chest. Every breath I drew tasted faintly metallic, sharp and intimate. The corners seemed to fold inward, narrowing the space around me, patient and deliberate. I reached toward the nearest shadow. Fingers brushed cold concrete, dust coating my skin. The shadow recoiled slightly, folding into itself, leaving only a thin, curling line of darkness. Another shape darted across the far wall. Thin, angular, moving with subtle grace, almost gliding. It disappeared as quickly as it came, leaving only the memory of movement and the faintest chill along my spine. I stepped back slowly. The shadows pulled again, patient, waiting, curling into corners I couldn't reach. The air pressed against my skin, damp and heavy, carrying whispers I couldn't understand. The flashlight beam caught a faint outline near the ceiling. Eyes, or something like them, pale, watching. They vanished when I blinked, leaving only the folds of darkness and my own rapid heartbeat. I lingered in the center of the room. The shapes twisted, curling along walls, patient and deliberate. Every step I had taken seemed to echo, hollow and slow, swallowed by the quiet. A cold brush of air tickled my neck. I could feel their presence, patient, aware, threading into the edges of light and shadow. The corners seemed alive, breathing with memory, carrying the weight of something unseen. I stepped toward the doorway. The shadows retreated slightly, folding back into corners, curling like smoke around the walls. The hum of stillness pressed against my chest, subtle, intimate, holding its breath. Outside, fog pressed softly against the bunker walls. The night smelled of wet earth, faint smoke, and lingering memory. I didn't look back, but I could still feel them, the shadows in the corners. Patient, watching, waiting. The room was dim, cold, and still. Dust hung in the air, thick and slow, settling over metal and concrete. The faint scent of oil and rust pressed against my nose, lingering in soft, heavy waves. In the corner sat a machine. Old, silent, or it should have been. But a hum vibrated through the air, low and steady, threading into my chest. I stepped closer. The floor beneath my shoes was rough, pitted, coated in dust and debris. The hum pulsed faintly through my feet, through my legs, settling into my chest like a heartbeat not my own. The machine's metal surface was cold, pitted with rust. My fingers brushed it gently. A vibration rippled beneath my touch, subtle, deliberate, almost alive. The air smelled faintly metallic, sharp and heavy. I leaned closer, Shadows stretched along the walls, folding into corners long and thin, reaching toward the humming. The hum grew slightly louder. Not mechanical, not electrical. Something deeper, threaded into the bones of the room. I could feel it vibrating in my chest, mingling with my heartbeat, pulling at my awareness. I circled the machine slowly. Dust shifted beneath my feet, brushing against my ankles, settling into folds of shadow. The vibration moved with me, patient, aware, almost teasing. The faint smell of oil and rust intensified. Every breath I drew was thick with memory, the air heavy with presence. I could feel the walls pressing closer, shadows pooling at the edges, waiting. The hum pulsed again, slow, deliberate. The vibration threaded through the floor, through my hands on the metal, curling into my chest. It was alive in its own quiet way, patient, deliberate, aware of me. I leaned closer, fingertips brushing the surface. Cold, rough, pitted with age. The hum responded subtly, pulsing beneath my hands, a heartbeat pressed into the concrete. The shadows shifted, edges curled, stretching along the walls, gathering near the machine. I could feel presence there, patient, deliberate, threading between the vibration and the silence. I stepped back slightly. The hum settled into a steady rhythm, echoing faintly in the corners, vibrating against my chest and teeth. The room felt alive with it, patient, aware, pressing against my senses. I lingered, watching the vibration pulse through metal and floor. Shadows folded back into corners, patient, deliberate, almost waiting. Every breath tasted of dust, rust, and faint warmth pressed into cold air. I finally stepped toward the doorway. The corridor beyond was dark and quiet, pale light fading into shadow. I moved slowly, leaving the humming machine behind. Outside, fog pressed softly against the bunker walls. The night smelled of wet earth, faint smoke, and the memory of vibration threaded into stone and metal. I didn't look back, but I could still feel it. The hum, the vibration. Patient, alive, waiting. The corridor narrowed as I moved forward. Cold stone pressed against my shoulders, rough and uneven, dust clinging to my skin. The air smelled of damp earth, iron, and faint smoke, heavy and still. The light from my flashlight flickered against walls that leaned inward. Shadows pooled and stretched, curling the corners like slow smoke. Every step I took echoed faintly, swallowed quickly by the tight space. The walls seemed to shift slightly, leaning closer, pressing against my senses. A whisper drifted from the stone, soft, intimate, almost tender. My name. I froze. The whisper repeated, threading to the cold, pressing into my chest. I could feel the walls closing in, patient and deliberate, waiting. My fingertips brushed the rough stone, cold and sharp beneath my skin, dust coating every ridge. The vibration of the whisper threaded along my hands, through my arms, curling into my chest. The passage narrowed further. I crouched slightly, shoulders scraping against stone, floor rough beneath my knees. The air pressed close, damp and metallic, thick with memory. The whisper grew softer, layering itself with something older, a hum, faint, vibrating through the walls, threading through my bones. I could feel it there, patient, deliberate, aware. Shadows flickered in the corners, long, thin, curling around edges I couldn't reach. Every blink shifted their shape, folding into the darkness, retreating when I looked too closely. I inched forward. The whisper pressed closer, curling around my ears, brushing my cheeks. The floor beneath me trembled faintly, as though echoing the presence of something deep in the walls. The passage became tighter. My chest pressed against stone, every breath thick with dust and metallic tang. The whisper repeated, patient, insistent, threading into my skull. I could feel the air pressing against my skin, cool and damp, holding the weight of the walls. Every step was deliberate, careful, guided by instinct. Shadows stretched along the edges, folding inwards, patient, deliberate, waiting. The hum beneath the whisper pulsed softly, faint but alive. It vibrated to the floor, through the walls, through my hands braced against stone. The air tasted of iron, earth, and something older, pressing against my tongue and nose. I paused mid-pass. The passage seemed endless, bending inward, folding around me. The whisper repeated my name again, soft, hollow, intimate, threading through the cold air. I pressed onward slowly. Every inch forward was heavy, deliberate, echoing faintly beneath my shoes and knees. The shadows moved with me, curling into corners, patient, aware. At last, the crawl space widened slightly. The air pressed less sharply against my shoulders. The whisper lingered, soft and intimate, fading slowly into silence. Outside, fog pressed against the bunker walls. The night smelled of wet earth, faint smoke, and lingering memory. I didn't look back, but I could still feel it. The narrow passage, the whisper, patient, watching, waiting. The wall was cold, rough beneath my fingers. A map hung there, edges curling, brittle with age. The air smelled faintly of dust and iron, thick and still. Dark stains marred the paper, deep as dried blood, lines twisted across it, tracing paths I couldn't follow. Every time I blinked, they seemed to shift, subtle, deliberate, impossible. I stepped closer. The floor beneath my shoes creaked softly, dust shifting with my weight. The air pressed against my skin, damp, metallic, carrying a quiet weight. The map seemed alive. Lines pulsed faintly, curling into new shapes when I looked away. The stains seemed to darken slightly, as though inhaling the air around them. I leaned closer, fingertips brushing the paper. It was rough, brittle, faintly sticky beneath my skin. The smell of iron pressed into my nose, sharp and intimate. Shadows pooled along the wall. Corners darkened, curling toward the map, patient and deliberate. The faint hum of stillness pressed against my chest, subtle but insistent. I stepped back. The lines shifted again, curling into paths I could not trace. Every blink revealed movement, subtle, deliberate, aware of me. The air grew colder. Breath puffed softly, thick and warm against the chill. The stains seemed almost to pulse, keeping rhythm with my heartbeat. I circled the map slowly. Dust shifted beneath my feet, whispering along the floor. The edges of the paper trembled faintly, curling further, patient, deliberate. A faint metallic tang lingered in the air. I could feel presence threading through the shadows, patient, aware, folding into corners. Lines shifted again, impossible paths stretching across the brittle surface. I pressed a fingertip to one of the dark stains. Cold and almost sticky, carrying memory, presence, weight. The map seemed to react, lines curling faintly, pulsing with subtle intent. I linger a moment, watching shadows gather along the edges. The room pressing softly, quiet and patient. The air smelled of iron and dust, carrying the faintest echo of something older. I stepped back fully. The map remained, dark stains deep as memory, lines curling and shifting impossibly. Shadows pooled in corners, patient, deliberate, watching. The corridor beyond waited, pale and silent. I moved slowly, leaving the map behind. The air brushed my skin, damp and cold, carrying memory, pressing faintly against my senses. I didn't look back, but I could still feel it. The map, the stains, lines moving, patient, alive, waiting. The corridor was quiet, thick with dust and shadow. Pale light from my flashlight trembled across the walls. The air smelled faintly of damp stone and old metal, heavy and slow. I noticed a small mirror set into the wall. Its edges were chipped, frame warped and worn. The glass was dull, slightly fogged, but something caught my eye. A figure reflected behind me. I froze. A shiver ran along my spine, cold and deliberate. I turned slowly. Nothing. Empty corridor, still and silent, stretching into shadow. My heartbeat pressed against my ears, steady and intimate. I stepped closer to the mirror. The air pressed against my skin, cool and damp, carrying faint scent of iron and dust. Shadows pooled in corners, stretching thin, curling like smoke. The reflection flickered again. A figure, faint, indistinct, watching. Every blink erased it, leaving only the pale, warped glass of my own trembling reflection. I pressed a fingertip to the mirror, cold, smooth, almost liquid beneath my skin. The figure shifted subtly, almost alive, folding into the glass when I looked too closely. The air seemed to hum softly, a vibration that threaded into my chest, slow, deliberate, patient. I could feel presence around me, folding into shadows, brushing my shoulders, brushing my spine. I stepped back. The reflection was gone. Only pale glass, corners shadowed, edges warped and patient. The corridor seemed narrower now. Shadows clung to the walls, curling, folding, almost breathing with the mirror's memory. Every breath I drew carried metallic tang, faint and intimate, pressing against my senses. I lingered, watching. The mirror waited, patient, aware. Shadows stretched along the floor, pooling softly, curling toward me in silence. I moved closer again. The glass shimmered faintly, lines of reflection bending subtly, impossible, deliberate. I blinked, and the figure returned, pale, thin, watching from just beyond my shoulder. I spun around. Still nothing. Empty corridor. Faint dust shifting underfoot. A cold draft brushed my neck, carrying weight, presence, memory. I pressed my palm to the glass again. The reflection shimmered, folding in on itself. The figure seemed aware of me now, patient, deliberate, lingering just beyond. I finally stepped away. The corridor stretched silent, shadows pooling in corners, patient, deliberate. The air pressed against my skin, cool, damp, and heavy with memory. I didn't look back, but I could still feel it. The mirror, the figure, patient, watching, waiting. The door creaked as I pushed it open. A room stretched before me, empty, walls bare, corners dark, shadows pooling patiently. The air pressed against my skin, heavy and still. It smelled faintly of damp stone and dust, metallic, lingering. Every breath I drew seemed amplified, echoing softly in the hollow space. I stepped inside. Footsteps bounced off walls, slow, deliberate, unnaturally loud. The floor was cold beneath my shoes, dust shifting slightly under my weight. The room felt alive, though nothing moved. Presence curled in the corners, patient, waiting, brushing along my senses. A hum threaded through the air, faint, vibrating along the floor and walls. I walked slowly, tracing the edges. Corners stretched in strange angles, shadows curling like smoke. Every step pressed against the weight of the unseen, pressing back softly, deliberate. The air smelled faintly metallic, faintly sweet, almost alive. I could feel it brushing my neck, soft as breath, pressing lightly, patient. My own heartbeat seemed too loud, echoing through the space, mingling with the room's quiet hum. I stopped mid-step. A shadow shifted subtly along the far wall, curling back into emptiness when I blinked. The room swallowed sound quickly, thick and deliberate, patient. I traced my fingertips along the cold walls. Rough, damp, texture with age, carrying faint memory, faint weight. The hum beneath my feet pulsed faintly, threading through my chest, subtle and insistent. I moved closer to the center. Shadows pooled around me, curling softly along the floor. The echo of my steps folded back on themselves, irregular, unnatural, as though the room remembered movements I hadn't made yet. The air grew heavier. Breath pressed thick against my throat, carrying faint sense of stone, rust, and something older. The silence was patient, deliberate, aware. I lingered a moment, standing still, presence curled around me, patient and unseen. Corners darkened, edges of shadows shifting softly, aware of me, folding closer. I stepped backward. Echoes trailed me, slower now, uneven, deliberate, insistent. The walls pressed subtly, close, patient, like the room itself was alive. The door waited, pale and still. I moved toward it slowly, careful not to stir the air more than necessary. Every inch forward pressed against unseen weight, the hum threading along my spine. I didn't look back, but I could feel it. The empty room, the presence, patient, watching, waiting. The room was quiet, dust floating lazily in pale light. I noticed a diary resting on a low shelf. Pages yellowed, edges curled, fragile with time. I picked it up carefully. The leather cover was cracked and cold beneath my fingers. A faint scent of old paper and smoke drifted from it, heavy and still. I opened the diary. Lines filled the pages. Ink faded but deliberate. The words chronicled the bunker's last days, each entry pressing with memory and weight. Names appeared on the page. They moved slightly, curling and shifting as though alive. I blinked, and they were formed deliberate, patient, aware of me reading. The air felt thicker. Breath came slow, warm, mingling with the scent of old ink and damp stone. Shadows pulled softly around the corners of the room, stretching thin, curling along the floor. I traced a finger along the words. Paper rough, brittle, carrying faint vibrations, almost alive. Each name seemed to whisper faintly, curling around the edges of my mind. A hum threaded softly through the room. It pressed lightly against my chest, patient, deliberate. The air seemed to hold its breath, waiting for me to look closer. I read on. Entries described footsteps in hallways, shadows moving when no one was there. I could almost feel them curling at the edge of my vision, patient and aware. The diary trembled slightly in my hands. Pages fluttered, turning gently though there was no draft. I could feel the memory pressing through the paper, soft and insistent. I lingered on one page. A name shimmered faintly, curling across the paper before my eyes. The air carried metallic tang, faint and intimate, pressing against my senses. The shadows shifted closer. Corners pulled in darkness, curling softly, deliberate. The diary seemed to pulse faintly, alive with memory, with presence, patient and aware. I closed it slowly. The names stopped moving, frozen again, but I could still feel them lingering, watching. The room exhaled softly, shadows pooling patiently, edges curling along the floor. I placed the diary back on the shelf. Its leather cover felt warmer now, almost breathing, almost alive. The air carried quiet weight, thick with memory, faint scent of ink and dust pressing against my skin. I stepped back. The room seemed still, yet aware, corners patient, deliberate, waiting. The diary remained, silent, watching, patient. The bunker's air was thick and still. Cold seeped into my bones, uninvited, patient. Shadows curled along the corners, stretching thin, deliberate. I walked slowly, footsteps soft against the rough floor. Dust shifted faintly beneath each step, carrying faint metallic tang. The hum of the walls pressed lightly, almost alive. A sudden chill brushed my shoulder. Cold, sharp, fleeting, like ice slipping across skin. I froze. Breath caught, warm against the sudden cold. I turned. Nothing. The corner where the feeling had lingered remained empty, silent. The air seemed thicker now. A faint scent of damp stone and iron pressed against my senses. Shadows shifted softly, curling toward me and away again. I moved forward, slower this time. The floor cold beneath my shoes, dust crunching faintly. Every heartbeat echoed, loud and deliberate, mingling with the room's hum. Then it happened again, a pressure light but insistent, brushing my shoulder. I flinched, spinning around. Empty. Only silence met my gaze, corners dark and patient. The chill lingered, trailing down my spine. Breath pressed shallow and quick, mingling with a hum that pulsed faintly beneath the floor. I could almost feel it curling at the edges of my vision, present yet unseen. I reached toward a wall, rough and damp beneath my fingertips. The air smelled faintly metallic, thick, carrying subtle weight. Shadows pulled in the corners, curling softly, deliberate, patient. I stepped forward again. The chill pressed along my arm, fleeting but sharp. Footsteps echoed faintly behind me. Though I was alone, the room seemed aware, breathing with the same slow patience I felt in my chest. Corners darkened further, shadows curling like smoke along the walls. Every inch I moved pressed against the unseen weight, deliberate and slow. I paused in the center. The hum beneath my feet pulsed subtly, threading through my bones. The cold brushed again, soft, fleeting, pressing lightly at my skin. I didn't turn. The room held its breath. The air thickened, heavy with unseen presence. Shadows folding in corners patiently, deliberately. The chill faded slowly, leaving warmth trembling in its place. Footsteps and echoes remained, irregular, insistent, patient. I took a careful step toward the door. It waited, pale and still. The hum pressed lightly one last time, echoing faintly in my chest. I left the room behind. Empty, silent, patient. The air above the stairwell smelled of rust and damp stone. Even in the pale light of my flashlight, the edges seemed to blur, folding into darkness. I could hear the faint hum of the walls, steady and patient. The first step groaned beneath my weight. Cold metal pressed against my fingertips as I gripped the railing. Each breath seemed louder here, sharp in the stillness. I descended slowly. The stairs spiraled, endless, curling into shadow. Every step echoed back at me, too loud, too deliberate, like it was mimicking my own heartbeat. A draft whispered upward, carrying the faint scent of iron and something older, dust, decay, and smoke. The edges of the stairwell seemed to shimmer, shadows sliding along the walls. I shivered, though my coat was thick and the air only cool. Another step. Echoes followed, longer, stretching impossibly far. I hesitated. The hum beneath the walls deepened slightly, vibrating through my chest. I could almost feel shapes moving in the shadows, subtle shifts, corners bending toward me. Yet, when I looked, there was nothing. The railing trembled under my hand, cold and slick with condensation. Each echo grew sharper, whispering of a presence behind me, soft, deliberate, patient. I moved again. The stairwell seemed to stretch downward, endless and hungry. Faint rustling came from below, but when I paused, it stopped. A faint clink, metal scraping lightly against stone. No one else was there. I kept ascending, slower now, senses straining. The shadows pooled in the corners, curling like smoke. A chill brushed my neck, fleeting, as though someone or something breathed just behind me. Each step pressed against the hum, pressing against my bones. The darkness seemed to lean closer, listening. I swallowed, dry and quiet. Another step, echoes longer, impossibly long. Something shifted in the dark, just beyond the light. I stopped entirely. The stairwell was silent, yet thick with expectation. The shadows waited patient. I gripped the railing tighter. The cold seeped into my skin, sharp, lingering. A faint metallic scent rode the chill, sharp as a memory I couldn't place. I descended the final steps I could see. The darkness ahead swallowed the rest. Each echo of my footfall felt like a warning, stretched, deliberate. The stairwell ended in nothing visible. Air thick and heavy pressed against my chest. The hum pulsed faintly beneath the stone, patient, alive. I could not see what followed, but I felt it there, patient, just beyond the reach of my light. Silent, waiting. The corridor was narrow, the air heavy with dust and cold. Pale light from my flashlight glinted off chipped paint and rusted handles. Every breath felt thick, as though the walls were holding it back. I stopped at a panel that seemed different. The wood was smoother, colder than the rest. A faint hum vibrated beneath my fingertips as I pressed against it. It shifted, slowly, almost reluctantly. A tiny room revealed itself, dark and cramped. The air smelled faintly of old paper, smoke, and something metallic. Shadows moved within, deliberate, purposeful, though I could see no one. I stepped closer. The floorboards creaked beneath me, echoing strangely. The shadows pooled and stretched toward the corners, twisting without shape. I tried to catch them with my eyes. They flickered when I blinked. Edges vanished as if the darkness itself breathed. A faint draft carried the scent of damp stone. It whispered along my neck. I shivered. Something shifted behind the shadows. A movement too smooth to be accidental. A shape hovered, then dissolved, leaving only the hum behind. The walls seemed closer here, almost suffocating. My fingertips brushed the edges of the panel, and it was warmer than the rest of the room. The hum deepened, pulsing faintly against my chest. I could hear soft steps, too slow, deliberate, echoing from inside the hidden room. When I leaned in, the darkness pressed outward, resisting my gaze. A chill swept across my shoulders, sharp, fleeting. I tried to peer further. Shadows darted away, leaving corners darker than before. The air felt alive, patient, waiting. A faint metallic click. The panel trembled, then stilled. I held my breath. The room was tiny, yet vast in feeling. Every shadow carried intent. Every breath sounded too loud, echoing where no wall should allow it. I stepped back slowly. The door panel slid, almost silently, into place behind me. The faint hum lingered, thrumming to the floor beneath my feet. I couldn't see inside anymore, yet I could feel it. Patient, waiting, deliberate. The hidden room did not want to be forgotten. The corridor seemed longer now, emptier, colder. Every step away carried the memory of the shadows. Moving, watching, alive. I left in silence, the hum fading but never gone. The hallway stretched thin, walls close, damp with cold. A faint hum drifted from somewhere deep, vibrating softly beneath my chest. The air smelled of rust and old stone, heavy with silence. Ahead, the doorway flickered. Pale light spilled unevenly across the floor, quivering as though it breathed. Shapes moved inside, shifting, changing, refusing to settle. I stepped closer. My feet pressed against cracked tiles, each one echoing far too loud. The air grew colder, brushing my neck with static fingers. The shapes, they weren't solid. Sometimes tall, sometimes low, sometimes barely there. Every blink changed them. I blinked. They vanished. The doorway became nothing but shadow and faint light. I blinked again. A figure crouched on the threshold, staring at me with something that wasn't eyes. Then gone. The hum deepened, vibrating against my ribs. My own breath sounded loud, uneven, breaking the silence into sharp pieces. A faint scent of smoke mingled with cold stone. I reached toward the doorway. My fingers brushed the air. It was colder than expected, almost liquid. The shapes twisted, stretched like shadows in water. I stepped back. The light flickered faster now, strobing faintly against the walls. For a moment, I saw hands reaching toward me. Thin, pale, impossibly long. I blinked. The doorway was empty. A soft, rustling whisper from within. The shapes, they were moving again, circling, waiting. I could feel them pressing, though there was nothing to touch. The hallway narrowed. Shadows pooled in corners, crawling slowly toward the doorway. The air trembled with that subtle vibration, humming against my skin. I leaned closer, desperate. Each blink revealed a new figure, a new motion, impossible and fleeting. A faint metallic tang reached my nose, coppery and alive. The light sputtered. The figures dissolved into nothing, then returned a heartbeat later, rearranged. Every blink made them stranger, more deliberate, patient. I pressed my hand against the wall, grounded myself. The hum vibrated stronger through my palm, up my arm, into my chest. The shapes paused, coiled, and darted just beyond understanding. I stepped back again, feeling the cold seep into my bones. The doorway flickered once more, pale and weak. For a moment, I thought I saw my own face staring back. Wrong, elongated, shadowed. Then nothing. The hallway swallowed the light. The hum faded to a faint pulse, like a heartbeat just out of reach. The shapes remained, somewhere beyond the flickering, waiting, patient. I walked past, shoulders stiff, breath tight in my chest. The doorway flickered one last time, then settled into silence. Shadows pooled quietly, watching. I didn't look back. The pale light vanished, but the memory of it lingered, shifting, flickering, alive. The corridor stretched endlessly, concrete walls damp and cold. My footsteps pressed against the floor, hollow, bouncing back at me. The air smelled of dust and rust, thick, unmoving. Then I heard it, a voice, my own, slowed and warped, bouncing from the walls. It repeated the words I hadn't even said aloud. I froze. The echo clung to the corners, curling around pipes and cracks. Every syllable was stretched, soft but heavy, like wet fabric brushing stone. I whispered a name. The voice repeated it, slow, distant, yet impossibly close. It trembled, vibrating through my chest, making my ribs ache. I stepped forward. The hallway narrowed, the hum of the echo pressing from all sides. The walls seemed to lean closer, inhaling with me. I tried another word. It returned warped, a shadow of sound that lingered longer than it should. The air grew colder, smelling faintly metallic, as if it bled from the concrete itself. Each echo became heavier, slower, dragging against the stone. I pressed my palm to the wall, shivering. It pulsed beneath my fingers, faint vibration, alive in some wrong way. The voice! It didn't belong to me anymore. It twisted, coiling through the hallway, soft and sinister. My own words carried a weight I couldn't lift. I blinked. Silence swallowed them for a heartbeat. Then they returned, distorted, echoing faster, closer, circling. I stumbled back, breath tight. The hallway grew darker with each repetition, shadows thickening in corners. The cold press of my shoulders curling into my spine. I tried to stay calm. My words, my thoughts, even my unspoken questions were trapped in that echo. It bounced endlessly, until I couldn't tell if I had spoken at all. The vibration of the voice pressed through the floor. It hummed in my feet, climbing my legs, rattling my skull softly. The air smelled faintly of smoke now, acrid, uneasy. I turned a corner. The echo followed, slowed, warping, dragging its tone behind me. Shadows twisted along the walls, fingers of darkness reaching. I whispered a warning. It returned, warped, dripping with hesitation, as though tasting fear. My chest tightened, and the pulse of the echo throbbed like a heartbeat not my own. I stopped, frozen. The voice, mine yet not, hovered in the still air. The concrete walls breathed softly around it, swallowing and returning. The echo faded slightly, retreating to somewhere unseen. But the vibration lingered in my bones. Every step forward felt heavier, haunted by the ghost of my own words. I left the corridor, shoulders stiff, breath ragged. The voice followed in memory, stretching longer than sound, twisting in the corners of my mind. It was not gone. The hallway grew silent. Only the faint pulse of concrete remained beneath my fingertips. And still, deep in the shadows, my words waited, slow, distorted, patient. The bunker was quiet, too quiet. Concrete walls pressed close, cold against my skin. I felt it first in the corner of my eye. A shape, pale, shifting, not fully there. I turned my head slowly. Nothing. The air smelled faintly of damp stone and rust. I blinked, and the figure returned, standing just beyond reach, its edges blurred, like smoke curling against the floor. I stepped closer. The shadow seemed to bend, watching, waiting. It didn't move like a person. It moved like the darkness itself, alive. My breath came uneven, puffing in the still air. I looked again. Gone. Only the faint echo of a shift in shadow, a suggestion of a smile. I whispered its name. The air trembled in response. A chill ran along my arms, crawling up my neck. I could feel it in the corners of the room, folding the shadows into shapes that weren't quite human. They darted when I turned. But when I looked away, they lingered. They lingered just long enough to press against the edges of my vision. I tried to blink it away. It returned, grinning quietly in the darkness. Not a smile I could see fully, but one I could feel. The floor beneath me was cold, uneven. My footsteps made soft echoes that didn't match my pace. The figure mirrored them, almost before I moved. I held my breath. The shadows twisted, forming lines and curves that suggested a presence. I could hear nothing, yet the weight of it pressed on my chest, heavy and patient. I whispered again, unsure if my voice was even mine. The figure flickered, dissolving into nothing, then reforming just beyond the edge of my vision. Its smile widened, slow, deliberate, quiet in its menace. The bunker seemed to shrink, walls leaning closer with each passing second. I could almost feel its fingertips brushing against the shadows, tracing my outline in the dim light. I backed away. Each movement felt delayed, as if the room itself resisted. The figure mirrored me in some wrong way, dissolving when I looked directly, only to appear behind me, smiling to the corners of my vision. Silence stretched, thick and heavy, vibrating faintly in the concrete. Even the air felt alive, watching, waiting. I could smell faint iron now, metallic, cold. I blinked again. The figure vanished. For a heartbeat, the room felt empty, hollow. Then I saw it, reflected in the pale light off a wall panel, grinning, just beyond reach. I wanted to move forward, but my legs refused. The shadows laughed softly, curling around the corners, around the floor, whispering along the walls. The figure faded as I exhaled, slow and deliberate, yet I could still feel it, still feel the smile lingering in the air, curling along my spine. Watching, waiting, I left the corner. The bunker stretched empty, silent, but not quite. I could sense in the darkness, in the cold, in the spaces my eyes refused to meet. And I knew it would wait. The bunker was darker than I remembered, the air heavy, pressing against my chest. Cold seeped through my coat, brushing my fingers. My flashlight shivered in my hand. A flicker, a weak pulse, then darkness. I was left with only the faint glow from cracks in the walls, spilling pale lines across the floor. Shadows moved there, just beyond the edges of the light. Not quite shapes, not quite air. They lingered, waiting, stretching silently across the stone. I stepped forward. The floor felt uneven, sticky in places I couldn't see. Each movement made a faint hum of the concrete vibrate beneath me. The cracks revealed more than light. Faint outlines shifted, indistinct forms that seemed to breathe with the bunker. I blinked. They vanished. A cold draft whispered across my neck, bringing the scent of rust and damp. My pulse thudded in my ears, uneven, loud. I tried to calm it, but the shadows seemed to lean closer, drawn to the panic I couldn't hide. I crouched, brushing my hand along the wall for guidance. The stone was rough, wooden spots, sticking cold against my skin. Every so often, the glow caught something, sharp edges, or the suggestion of them. I couldn't tell. My flashlight hummed faintly before the battery died completely. I was swallowed. The bunker exhaled around me, thick and quiet. The shapes returned, in the corners, in the faint lines of light. They were just beyond reach, just beyond recognition. I could sense movement, careful, deliberate, circling. I whispered to myself. No answer came, only the echo of my own words bouncing faintly in the concrete. The air seemed to hold them, stretching each syllable into silence. I moved forward slowly. Every step was uncertain, tentative, dragging across the cold, uneven floor. The cracks in the walls painted ghosts of light, fleeting, trembling. Something brushed the air behind me. Not a touch, not a hand, but a presence that chilled my spine. I froze. The bunker pressed in, corners deepening, ceilings lowering, shadows thickening. I dared to look. Nothing, yet the air felt heavier, denser, almost breathing. The light shifted, the cracks revealing more edges, more forms I couldn't name. I felt their attention, not watching, but waiting, patient, cold, and unmoving. I exhaled slowly, trying to steady my shaking hands. The glow pulsed, weak and uneven, teasing me. I could see shapes that weren't there when I looked directly. The bunker seemed alive, moving with the shapes, folding the shadows in ways that made no sense. The walls whispered faintly, a hum, a vibration I could feel more than hear. I stepped back. The cracks in the walls cast long, quivering lines, stretching across the floor. They felt like tendrils, reaching for me, wrapping the dark, yet never touching. I stayed still, breath shallow, listening. The last light shivered along the walls, flickering, trembling, dying, and then it was gone. Darkness settled fully. I was alone, yet I was not. The air itself seemed to watch, to wait. I could feel it all around me, in the cracks, in the cold, in the silence. The bunker held its breath. I held mine. The door groaned as I pushed it open. Morning light spilled unevenly across the concrete threshold. The air outside was cold, damp, carrying the scent of earth and old stone. I stepped onto the ground. The bunker behind me loomed silently, shadows pooling where the light couldn't reach. Each breath I drew felt heavier than the last, weighted with things unseen. Fog clung low to the ground, curling around my feet. It was pale and thin, like smoke that remembered fire. The silence pressed in thicker than the air, yet I felt it, watching, waiting. Dawn stretched across the horizon. Light struck the metal and concrete, warming the cold skin of the bunker. But even with the sun rising, the air remained dense, trembling with memory. I glanced back. The walls held their quiet secrets, the corners deeper than I could see. For a moment, I thought I saw movement, a shadow darting just behind a broken window. And then it was gone. The ground beneath my boots was uneven, littered with pebbles and rusted scraps. I brushed my fingers against the rough stone walls near the exit, feeling the cold, silent grip of the bunker linger. Even here outside, I could feel its presence, like a weight pressing against my chest. Birds moved in the distance, their wings brushing the soft light. The breeze stirred leaves, carrying whispers of damp earth and rust. Yet the wind didn't touch me fully. It circled, hesitant, aware. I walked slowly, letting the morning stretch around me. The air carried echoes of footsteps I hadn't taken, voices I hadn't heard, or perhaps had. Every movement I made seemed to disturb something delicate and unseen. I reached the edge of clearing. The horizon stretched wide, pale light scattering over hills and trees, over the ruins left behind. The bunker's mouth yawned behind me, dark and still, as if waiting for something I would never bring. I knelt, brushing dirt from my hands. The earth was cold and damp, smelling faintly of metal and decay. I traced the lines of shadow at my feet, watching them flicker as light strengthened. The silence didn't end. It wrapped around me, subtle and unyielding, carrying the weight of the past within it. I felt it coil around my ankles, brushing up, pressing gently against my back. I took a deep breath, tasting fog and faint iron. The world beyond the bunker was quiet, too quiet, yet alive with distant rustling and unseen movement. It felt like walking through a memory not entirely my own. I stood, brushing the last chill from my coat. Light spilled over the bunker's edges, soft and pale, revealing its age, its rust, its frozen time. And still, the air felt heavy, as though the past had stretched itself into this morning, lingering in the gaps between shadows. I walked forward, step by careful step. The sun climbed higher, but it did not warm me fully. The weight of what had been and what had followed remained just beyond the edges of sight. I glanced back one last time. The bunker was still, silent, almost patient. Its walls seemed to breathe, holding the darkness tight, keeping it from spilling entirely into the world. The morning air settled around me. I felt the remnants of its presence brush my skin. Not threatening, not violent, but patient. I took a final step away. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of stone and earth, soft and unrelenting. The bunker receded, quiet, watching, leaving only the pale light of dawn to guide me. And for the first time, I was truly alone. Yet the silence followed. Not empty, only heavy and waiting,